Pretty remarkable headlines coming out of Berlin. Now, President Zelensky says, I'll give up on the quest to join NATO as well. We haven't seen really a single concession by the Russian sides. Would something like this, though, get the gears turning toward peace?
Well, Joe, I think you're right that we are seeing real progress coming out of these 2 days of talks in Berlin. There have been Ukrainian concessions, but I would put them in quotation marks.
Okay.
NATO membership was something that was always going to be a very long-term prospect. Sure. But what the Ukrainians are asking for is NATO-like Article 5 security guarantees. And that is one of the main sticking points for these conversations. What security guarantees can the United States and Europe give to Ukraine when Russia violates this peace deal? That and, of course, territorial concessions. Will the Ukrainians approve of turning over land that they currently defend in the Donbass? Those are really the 2 key sticking points.
And I guess 3 when you add NATO. So let's pick 100%. Through them. To your point, NATO is an ambition. That was not something that was about to happen and wouldn't be unlocked by a peace deal. So let's focus on the other 2 here, because I guess Zelensky is kind of warming up to the idea of maybe joining the EU, if not NATO. But without NATO, there's still an Article 5 type of guarantee here that's being talked about. And that came as well from Witkoff and Kushner, right? This wasn't just Zelensky putting this forward. The United States suggested this without the involvement of Europe, but it would require European troops, would it not?
Yeah, I mean, I think there certainly the U.S. would have to have those security guarantees. There's some rumors coming out of Berlin that the administration would submit these security guarantees for Senate ratification, almost like a treaty, like we would do to amend the NATO treaty. That would be important. But yes, Europe has to be part of this as well. And the Ukrainians have negotiated bilateral security guarantees with those countries. But the question, Joe, is when they're tested, will we apply military power against Russian forces, again, when they violate this peace deal? And that is the question mark.
I think that was framed as in the event of a sustained attack in the initial language we saw. So a cruise missile into an apartment building wouldn't qualify. Right.
But again, the sustainment may be through hybrid activities, meaning that they would seize the territory. It wouldn't be through military means, but they would do it through hybrid warfare. That wouldn't trigger it. So huge question marks.
All right, well, let's talk territory then, because you freeze the lines on the Donbass, and I think Zelensky suggested maybe that he puts this to a vote, right? Let's actually have the people who live there vote on this. I'm guessing that based on his history of behavior, Vladimir Putin wouldn't care either way, would he?
Yeah, this is where I actually do think Vladimir Putin does care, because it's now in the Russian constitution that these 4 Ukrainian territories are Russian.
So that's the motherland, he says.
Exactly. And this is the restoration of Russia's historic lands. But this would be Ukraine giving up territory it currently defends, and this territory is part of its so-called fortress belt, which is its defensive line. So without those lines, Ukraine is going to have a very hard time being able to reinforce its military across its border. So in some ways, it would render it in part defenseless.
This is why we were talking about a potential demilitarized zone in that area, right? Is that a more realistic approach?
Well, again, it gets back to the who protects this demilitarized zone. Again, it's important to remember, we've been to this movie before when the first annexation and incursion into Ukraine, there was an OSC monitoring force. And that ceasefire was violated repeatedly, even though it was monitored. And this is where, again, Russian hybrid tactics really were trying to change the status on the ground.
Really interesting. So we've talked through some of the particulars that are at the table here, and I guess they have concluded. This was a 3-hour session today in Berlin. It was about 5 hours yesterday. I'm assuming everybody flies home now, and President Zelensky sure would love an invitation here to the U.S., but we've still left the Europeans out of this conversation as well. The Russians haven't given much in the way of encouraging remarks about this, so are we just spinning our wheels until everyone's in the same room?
Well, I think the Europeans are feeling better. The fact that these conversations were held in Berlin and that they actually were at the table. Now, the incredible visual is the U.S. is on one side, Europe and the Ukrainians on the other side, that we are negotiating with our European partners.
Who would have thought?
I think, exactly. I think this plan now, whatever comes out, is going to have to be briefed to the Russians. I assume that Special Envoy Witkoff has already been keeping the Russians pretty well informed. They may not accept some of these changes. And you're absolutely right. If the Ukrainian government does decide to make some territorial concessions, have to change their constitution to remove NATO, you're talking about a referendum. You're talking about an election that President Zelensky did just say over the weekend that potentially could happen in 60 to 90 days after a peace deal. So it could be a lot of changes, or we could be quite stalled.
Is there a single Russian concession that you could see coming out of this?
No.
Well, my God, how do you find peace in that world?
So you cave, you capitulate to the Russian position, and
brutal.
It's absolutely
but
brutal.
Is that sustainable? If you're framed as capitulating,
it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable.
You're ready to fight another war.
In Ukraine, it's not sustainable in Europe. It's not sustainable for the United States and our security interests. This is why the British head of MI6 just came out with a devastating speech saying we're already in war with Russia. The hybrid activity, NATO Secretary General Rutte last week said in 5 years there will be war. So you hear us preparing for this, yet we're talking about appeasing the aggressor. It is extraordinary. It does feel like 1938.
Well, that's a heck of a statement here. Will it feel like 1938 for the next 3 years and 2 months? To what extent is the administration keeping this Russian dream alive?
So it is...
Or maybe a Putin dream is a better way to put it.
Well, again, this is where last week's national security strategy did not articulate who our adversaries are. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. It spoke about a focus on the Western Hemisphere. It talked about securing economic and strategic stability. We are closing our eyes to this. And if, in fact, the United States provides security guarantees, we are inserting ourselves in this. So this is a moment for clarity of knowing who the aggressor is, who is challenging the United States and our European partners, and preparing for potential conflict.
Just a minute to go here, Heather. What is China learning as it watches the way we work with Ukraine, keeping Taiwan in mind?
I think it is learning that we will appease for some sort of magical economic stability, that you have, you don't have that stability. It is emboldening those who believe that they can snatch territory, and that if there's economic disturbance, that they will negotiate and get that stability. It's a terrible message to America's adversaries.
Boy, it really is. Is that because you think that Donald Trump is more interested in normalizing economic ties with Russia? When you talk about that economic stability, imaginary or not, how does he find it here?
Well, I think what is elusive is that there is no momentary deal that will stick. And I think this is what the White House is learning with all the deals that have been negotiated. They're starting to fall apart because it's not just that moment. It's creating the structure to deter aggression, to be strong, and send a clear message to our adversaries. We are strong with our allies and partners. Don't violate international law.